Hi, everyone. Welcome to another GMAT Club live. Good seeing you right after yesterday, where we sort of did an interview with Vineet, who works with GMAC. I learned yesterday that it's not GMAC, it's GMAC. So we talked about the GMAT Online. We talked about some of the changes, some of the developments that's been happening with the GMAT and the GMAT Online. So today, in weekend fashion, we're going to talk about not the GMAT, but more of the MBA. And Sam and I were wondering how we can make better content that is not more driven by specific needs, but more onto general MBA things. So we decided we would do an episodic session on the MBA application, and we're going to look at all the different elements that make up an MBA application, sort of as a nostalgic journey from what we were applying back in 2018. So, but before we jump into that, let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm Souvik. I'm a second year student. I'm an alumnus at the Michigan Raw School of Business. You probably know me. And Sam, you have been around the block many times, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey all, Sam just graduated Michigan MBA and hopefully going to Microsoft full time in the summer.
Awesome. So, Sam, I know you spent a lot of time in your resume. I spent twice the time that you did because I applied to schools twice. So I have some pretty strong failure stories to talk about. So we'll get to that. But I wanted to start off with, like the resume in general and how important the resume is. And I have my thoughts, but I'll let you go first. How important do you think the resume is?
I think it's pretty important for the admissions committee. I mean, I think from what I can tell, you want to have one of two things. You want to either have some big name experiences or some like rich details that you did during your experiences, or maybe some interesting stuff that nobody else has. But I think it's pretty important. I don't know how like important it is to get every word right and to spend a lot of hours on it, because I don't know, maybe they'll read it for a minute if you're lucky, but it's really a synopsis of what you did in between undergrad and now. So it is going to be somewhat important.
Yeah, I actually think it's the most important part of your application because I think that's sort of the initial screening process. And if you have a resume that really doesn't interest the admissions, they're probably going to trash it. And I have some theories and some hypotheses around that, mostly speculation from spending a lot of time on the GMAT Club forums. But I have a theory that if you don't have a great resume coupled with a decent GMAT score, your application may not even be read. And, if anybody wants to ask questions about that theory, we can get to that later. But I think it's super important because it's sort of like the front page, sort of the way to create a big first impression. At the same time, I think you are right, but I think you're also being generous. I think you'd be super lucky to have someone spend a full minute on your resume. I think it's more like a few seconds. I think there have been studies done on how many seconds people spend on the resume, and I think it's like double digits, like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. So it becomes even more challenging to sort of, highlight your biggest accomplishments to sort of cram in that 20 seconds.
Yeah. It's a tough one because with these apps, you've got the resume you submit, then you've got to do like their own through their application. Like you got to fill out your experience and like do the same bullet points. So, you got to do it. But, I think the GMAT score is more important. And then I think the way you explain your resume and your tracks and the path through it is through your essays. So I think those two are a little more important, but in my opinion, but you just don't know.
Awesome. So with that, what I had in plan today for the session is we're going to talk about some high level stuff with the resume. We're going to talk about what really makes a resume and what doesn't, and then there are some MBA resume specific things that I want to touch on. And then we're going to jump into three of my old resume bullet points and trash them and see how we could improve some of that, right? Okay, so let's jump into it. So, a few things that I would like to just ask you questions around, Sam, and of course, I have my opinions too, is how the MBA resume is sort of different from other resumes, like when you apply for a job or when you're applying for other programs or other schools. The first thing that I sort of when I looked for when I was applying to business schools, sort of reach out to people who have applied to grad schools in different universities and sort of check their resume. And I always thought their resume was like 2 page, sometimes even 3 page, with a lot of details of their thesis and their projects, very academic. But when I did my own research, it became very clear that most resumes sort of have to be 1 page. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think unless you're a world-renowned speaker or an author or you've published a lot in a lot of research journals, I think 1 page.
Yeah, I think there's like this empirical cutoff. Like if you have less than 10 years of work experiences, you should have a 1 page resume.
Yeah,
And I think my only thought is that you'd be surprised with how much you can cram in 1 page
yeah, yeah.
without it looking like a text wall.
I think you should
Yeah.
try to get to 1 page. It'll make in that exercise, it'll make each experience and the bullet points very punchy, very sharp.
Yeah. So with that said, if you Google resume, you have all these first of all, you have all these boring resumes with just like a white page with like text and headers and all that stuff. But you also have like this very cool infographics with like pictures and sliders and bars and all of that stuff. Um, how do you think the MBA resume should look like?
I think I mean, I think the boring plain Jane one, I think is fine. I think yeah, I think that's fine. I think you're looking for more details. You're looking to get out the details of your experience that are going to set you apart. And I don't know necessarily if the infographic, while they look really great, um, I don't I don't know if that. I think the details are more important. And the person that I worked with said the same thing. I asked the same question, but that was my experience.
Also, like you're trying to impress at least at this stage, unless you're like applying to like an architecture or a design firm. You're trying to impress with the content of the resume,
Yeah.
not the design of the resume. And the other thing is, I think you sort of want to be sensitive towards the kind of resumes the admissions committee are used to looking at. And if your resume stands out in looking different, it actually makes their job harder to navigate the resume. And
Yeah.
you want to be able to make their job as easy as possible by having a very standard template. So what I would recommend is a lot of these schools would often have resume books, right? So like all these business schools would have their resume books, which is sort of like published by their career services. So you want to take a look at that, and you want to sort of mirror or mimic that formatting.
Yep. I agree.
Do you have preferences for fonts? Do you have a special font for the resume?
I use Times New Roman for something that's really, I guess, formal and official.
Yeah, I would say go the same route. You don't have to use Times New Roman. You can use Arial or Calibri or Helvetica if you're an Apple user. I use Times New Roman for two reasons. Number one, it's super simple and formal. But number two, Times New Roman actually takes less space than Arial for the same font size and the same content. So yeah, so the couple of pointers from this. Boarding is good when it comes to the resume, and also you want to keep your resume under 1 page. So let's talk a little bit about what goes in the resume, and this is also where I think a lot of people sort of trip. A resume is not a record of your experience. It's sort of a highlight of your accomplishments. So did you run into this issue? Because I ran into this a lot, because at the beginning, my resume was like, oh, I did this. I was
Yeah.
responsible for this. I managed these people. Or I wasn't really accomplished. I wasn't really talking about my accomplishments. What did you think of that, Sam?
Yeah, you're gonna have at the start trouble kind of paring it down and zooming into the really important stuff. So yeah, I had a difficult time with that.
Yeah, and I think Maria from Applicant Lab says something that I like your resume is sort of like your highlight, like the best of mixtape.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like if you were a band and you've been around for like 20 years and you want to sort of create a greatest hits album, that's your resume. Um, you really don't want to talk about what you do day to day, and there are spaces within the school application that lets you do that, so you
yeah.
can utilize that space for to talk about what you do every day. But the resume is sort of best kept for your greatest accomplishments, your best stories, and that will also help out in figuring out the stories that you want to highlight later in your application, in your essays, your interviews, and all of that stuff. So awesome. Again, we'll take questions. I like that we're getting questions already. Feel free to post questions. Abhineet, I like your question about sequence. We'll get to that at the end, but we're sort of like hang tight and keep asking questions, and we'll get to those. Okay, so with that said, I want to. My PowerPoint. Okay, there you go. Okay, so with that said, I want to chat a little bit about how to sort of articulate some of those accomplishments, right? And there are multiple formatting techniques to that. There's CAR. I think I talked about CAR in a previous resume segment. CAR is basically you talk about your context and you talk about your action, what you did, and the results, right? And then there is STAR, which is situation, task, action, result. And then you have like a modified CAR that I use, which is ACR, which delves into the action first, then zooms out, gives people context, and then talks about the result. So Sam, did you use any of that either in your MBA application resume or when you're applying for jobs out of business school?
Yeah, I think the ACR for resume, just for resume, works best. You lead off with the action, then you say why you did the action,
Yeah.
and then you put a comma and you say this resulting in whatever impact. I think that's a really nice tight format for resumes.
Yeah, so I am a big fan of that too. So that's this ing modifier. So I would sort of like build up what I did and then give people context, and then comma resulting in, or comma increasing something, or comma reducing costs, or stuff like that. And we'll get to those examples, right? Okay, so time for some real embarrassment, right? So I would go to some of my examples, but before we jump in, I would urge you guys to pick a format and stick to it. If you pick ACR, don't jump back to CAR, or don't jump back to STAR. It makes the job of a reader really difficult in sort of transitioning from one format to the other. So I pick ACR because it was easier for me to sort of digest information that way. But let's see what a bad job I did. Okay. So the first bullet point is from my real MBA resume that didn't get me accepted anywhere. The second one, I sort of redid my whole application, changed my goals, and then sort of made some impact. I don't think that my improved resume got me into business school the second year, but I think it definitely had a part to play in it. All right, so let's look at my first bullet point. Responsible for building ed tech interventions in 7 cities to increase retention and learning abilities. What do you think of that fine bullet, Sam?
So there's no action. The responsible for building is for more responsibility. I've got context.
Yeah.
So you're looking to increase retention, learning, and abilities. And I don't know if there's no result. I don't know if you were successful in doing it or not.
Yeah. So that's exactly what it is. First of all, the result is like murky at best, because I built those interventions to increase something, but what happened, right? And also like being responsible for something is barely anything. Like I could be responsible for anything in the world, but I need to sort of talk about what I actually did. The other thing about results is I know this is super challenging, and sometimes people make up numbers, and I've made up numbers before. You want to quantify it as much as possible, and there's a fine line between estimating something and completely making something up. So I would urge you to go on that estimation side rather than completely fabricate stuff, because you will forget, and then when someone asks in the interview, you come up with different numbers that you've made up. It's going to be a very embarrassing situation. So I sort of redid this bullet point. Sam, what do you think of the next one, which is sort of a revision? Designed EdTech interventions in 45 schools across 7 cities for 100,000 students, increasing retention by 49% and learning by 27%.
Yeah, I mean, it's really solid. I think the only critique that I would have is that, so from the first one, it shows responsible for. The second one is designed. If that's what you meant by responsible design, it's perfect. But if there's something, because sometimes when you're responsible, you're kind of leading, you know?
Yeah.
So it's always good to say led the building or led the initiative. So design really scopes it down to something where I really understand exactly what you did. But if you did more than just design, you may want to think of a better lead action verb. But I really like the format. It's very easy to understand.
Right. Yes, that is true. And when you're using verbs, by the way, design can mean a lot. Right? Design can mean like maybe you whiteboarded something, or maybe you built a model and somebody else did the job. So you want to be as granular as possible, right? Also, if you're saying something like led can also be super misleading. What did you really lead? Did you lead a team? Did you lead the project? So being a little bit more specific would help you. The other thing around, I'm sorry, I'm sort of getting questions on this bullet point, and somebody's calling you Chris. I think Sam and Chris are totally interchangeable. But the quick question around the resume need tailoring to depending on the school. I ask because the things you've done remains constant. If yes, how much tailoring does one do per university? Well, I mean, I had one resume, man. I mean, I applied to, I don't know, like 12 schools, and there was no way I was going to make 12 different resumes. The only place where I would recommend some changes, if you're applying to a school, if you're applying to different schools with different short and long-term goals, there are reasons for doing that. It's like hacking the system. You apply to Stanford with like an entrepreneurial goal, and you're applying to Kellogg with the consulting goal. That's fine. I think people do that. And in that case, the resume can be a little bit different. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for the most part, it's going to be the same. Maybe for a school that, for example, there's ones that cater more towards and like people with a lot of public service. And so maybe you'd zoom in on some more stuff there. But for the most part, it's going to be the same.
Yeah. Question around that bullet point. With regards to your car format and your first point, how does one address this in places where they've been at for lesser times and consequently can't see tangibles? Like, you have to see tangibles. Like, if you can't see tangibles, you can talk about expected outcomes or projected outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's fine. A lot of people, especially who are in consulting, they don't have tangibles because they are consulting. They're creating a strategy. So you can talk about projected outcome, projected retention, projected reduction, projected increase, and stuff like that. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, and I think on that, I agree totally with that. I think on that note as well, there's always going to be this pressure to put the biggest percentage possible, the biggest numbers possible. I don't think you have to do that. Like with your statement, even if it said increase retention by 15% and learning by 25%, that's still a good impact. Like, it's very hard to have substantial impact.
Yeah.
And so there's no pressure to drive up those numbers and artificially inflate them. Really just honestly think about it and see and put a reasonable number on it, the anticipated results or the actual results. And I think you'll be fine.
Awesome, Sam. You have your apology. So, by the way, if you don't know Sam's name by now, come on.
I look different because I have shaved head and no facial hair, or light facial hair.
I want to get there too. Okay, so let's look at another bullet point. Sam, what do you think of this one? Served as a member of a leading charter school board. Very concise. What do you think?
I mean, I think if, it doesn't tell me much. Now, if you said served as a member of the Kennedy Center in Washington, okay, I would think somehow maybe, you would rely on the cloud of the name. But other than that, I don't know. That could be I don't know what you actually did. And I
Yeah,
don't know what you actually impacted.
yeah. I think I don't. This was like back in 2017, so I barely know or remember what I was going for. But I think I was going for prestige. Like, look, I serve on a board. And that's cool, but I can serve on the board of my house, or on my home, with my mom and dad being the co-chairs. That doesn't really mean much, right? So so yeah, so basically, yeah. So after that formatting, I sort of changed it to led a leading charter school board to create new recruiting structures across 75 schools to improve teacher retention by 37%. What do you think of that revision?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I think that if this is going under a bullet point of, member of the board or board member, then you could just start with the create new recruiting structures or, something of that thing. Because that's really what you're trying to zoom in on. And then I've got a little tweak with the number that you put at the end. But yeah, I mean, I think you always want to start with what you actually did. Here you're trying to really say you created new recruiting structures, which is really the action that the people are looking to see, the AdCom.
Right. Awesome. We're gonna go look at one more. This one is sort of like my main job. So I did teach at Teach for India for 2 years, right? So I wanted one bullet that sort of talks about my main role. And for me, I wanted to highlight my teaching accomplishment, but it was hard to do that without talking about what I did every day, right? So I struggled with this one a lot. So what do you think of this bullet point? Taught 120 students math and writing for 2 years with different abilities to increase learning outcomes.
I don't. It's like the wording is a bit clunky, but I like it. I think the only thing missing is really like a result, like what learning outcomes did increase and how
Right.
many people did you help. I think the tricky part here and it's seeing the two is really how do you account for the differing abilities? Like, how do you work that in? Because obviously the after car is a really sharp, nice statement.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say with those.
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of, talk a little bit more about how can I replace the word taught with something that is more action oriented and something that's more, dynamic. But I just couldn't come up with it. I felt that taught is the only thing that I did, and you could talk about instructed or facilitated. I was like, no. I mean, it's teaching. It is what it is.
I think the word taught, especially when you're applying to MBA, is a very good word because either on the job it's the minute I see it, if you're on a job, I'm going to think you act as a mentor, and if it's not on a job, you did some nonprofit work and something you didn't have to do. So I like it. I think it's a good verb to use.
Awesome. So that is pretty much it. I'm going to remove my screen. So I'm going to go back to, by the way, we had like one user on YouTube who was talking about how Sam and Chris are not interchangeable, and it's an abomination that people think they are. Chris is not a real person. Okay. So somebody forgot Sam's name, and we are very forgiving. It's totally okay. So calm down a little bit.
Yes, Mr. Great 1, 2, 3, 4, all good.
No, I mean, I had to like mute this user. Anyway, I think it was a troll. Okay, so question. Again, feel free to post questions. We have about 5 to 10 minutes, so I'm gonna take a few of those. So I have a huge list of extracurricular activities, volunteering, startup accelerator experiences, etc. How can I condense it all and focus on the important bits? Well, okay. So one thing that we didn't talk about today, that we're going to do an MBA resume part two, which will be purely based on the section of your resume other than your work experience, right? And work experience will probably take up about 60, 70% of your space, your education maybe 10%, and you want to leave a bit of space for all this stuff, for all your extracurricular stuff. My general advice is your job is your job. That's your main thing. I would maybe spend 10% of the space. You can make a section called other. You can make a section called volunteering, and all of that is fair game. What do you think, Sam?
I think it should. I agree with that. I think it should track your journey that you write in your personal statement. Why you're doing this. If doing this volunteer work, you were there a lot, and it had a huge impact on you shifting, and you had a decent leadership position. It should be a separate bullet point with really built out, details of other sub bullet points. If these are just extras that don't really blend into your journey, but you just want to show that you're doing this stuff in the extra, I would put it in another section, and then you can kind of have a potpourri of different extracurriculars.
Right. Yes, that's sort of what I did. I had an other section where I put in like my extracurricular like cooking stuff and traveling stuff. I would also like to highlight like one thing very quickly, that you don't want to condense everything. The resume is not an exercise of cramming. Even in your extracurricular and your volunteering and all of that stuff, you want to talk about, again, your greatest hits. You want to figure out which ones are your best accomplishments and then put them out there. So I remember I was when I was applying, I wanted to write about being able to cook. Like I learned how to cook. It was a big part of my hobby and sort of my extracurricular. And I took it seriously. I wasn't like a hobby cook. I went to a school for a few months. It was fun. When I actually put it on the resume, I sort of wrote like this amateur chef, and that's pretty much it. Which was like everybody is an amateur chef, and the person I worked with, Maria, she said that sure you're doing that, but also talk a little bit more about why you are, more than just some random person who goes to Whole Foods and buy groceries and like cooks out of Blue Apron. How sort of you're sort of a little bit advanced than that, and that helped me understand, okay, this is my big accomplishment in my extracurricular repertoire, and I want to give more meat to that example. Yeah. Okay. Question. Can we write the same point in resume and elaborate? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you should. Your essays are sort of like the stories behind your resume. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
I have jumped jobs in the initial part of my career. How bad is that? Will they do background checks with my past managers? I think somebody from GMAT Club answered this question in this thread, but they will do background checks. First of all, you can jump jobs. That's fine. Just don't make stuff up. I think that's fair. And even if you have jumped jobs, there must be some sort of an HR record. So I think you'll be fine. All right. So taking more questions. Okay, I've done several freelance projects, few months length. How do I put it in resume without making it too long? Sam, what do you think?
It depends what they are. It depends. Again, have these freelance projects shifted your trajectory into where you want to go in life and severely impacted your journey? Or are they just kind of side things that you want to kind of show off? Side things you want to show off, I would do another section. If they severely affected your journey and you can say a couple different bullet points, I don't see why you can't put them in the meat of the resume.
Right. Yeah, I think you should, especially if it's like, really impressive stuff with a really big client.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should absolutely. any sequence we should follow while presenting ourselves? Yeah, so the MBA sequence is a little bit tricky. Like, for example, when I was in Ross applying to jobs, my sequence was different from when I was applying to Ross. So basically, you want to start with what you're doing currently. If you are working currently, which I hope you are when you're applying for the MBA, then your work experience sort of go first, and then you sort of have education or other, and then your education. It's sort of that's the sequence. If you're applying for jobs out of business school, then your education sort of goes first because that's what you're doing today, right now. What you have different thoughts, Sam?
No, no, I agree. I think that it's tough if you have a kind of a hodgepodge of different experiences, especially some going on at the same time, which order to put in.
And you had that though, right?
I had that a lot. I mean, I think what I settled on and what seemed to land best was kind of a chronological of start dates almost.
Yeah.
So they could nicely follow through. And you don't have to show really the main thread of all the whys in your resume. That's for personal statement. That's for interviews. But at least if you do chronological based on a start date or end date or something, at least they'll be able to follow, the timeline.
Yeah, you want it to be easier for them. You shouldn't have like your most current work experience sitting below your previous work experience. That just makes life a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I had that challenge because I wanted to highlight something that was the most impressive, but it was not most current, and I wanted to keep it at the top. I think that's a bad idea. It sort of confuses people because admissions do want to see like a timeline of what you did when you started working. Awesome. Couple more questions. We're getting out of time. Sam has to drive his girlfriend to her parents' place, so I think I'm gonna hear from her if I don't let you go, Sam. Okay. Hi, Souvik, and okay, this is the other question. We I think talked about this. The resume tailoring to okay, we talked about this. Sorry about that. What kind of extracurricular activities are important? Shall we put school achievements as well? No, I mean by school, I hope you mean high school and stuff. No. I think your resume for your MBA starts after you leave high school and you go to college. I think there are some ways of talking about some extracurricular stuff that you did in college. I would still say maybe if you're only 3 years out of college, 4 years. I was 7 years out of college when I matriculated at Ross. So most of my college stuff, they were impressive, but I didn't really put them in my other section. I made 2 small bullet points underneath my education.
Yeah.
Where I sort of put some of my college accomplishments, I was like recruiting coordinators and stuff like that, but very, very brief. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I would put them under the education thing, and I would be brief, 1 or 2 that show any kind of leadership or sports. If you go to an American school, but anything leadership would be nice. Just one or 2 bullet points, doesn't have to be too long.
Right. Okay. So I saw a question about So do you put your GMAT score on the resume? Well, people will say different things. I would say if your GMAT score is really, really high, why not? I did. I mean, it sounds. Is it a little bit of a vanity thing? Yeah, sure it is. But I sort of had this irrational fear that my undergrad was in like a top 12, top 10-ish kind of an engineering college in India, and I just didn't know if they know the college or if they knew the grading scale, which turns out they did because they were alumni from my college. But I was scared of that, so I wanted to throw in some other ways to tell them that, hey, like, look, I mean, I can do math, okay? So I threw in my GMAT score. What do you think, Sam?
I don't remember if I did or not. I'm thinking I didn't because I was like, well, it's on the rest of the application.
Yeah.
But I don't think I think, if you got a good score that you're proud of, you can put it on there. I don't think it's a problem.
Does your resume have to be a bullet point version of your essay? Things that you would then go on to elaborate on your essay? Like, I don't know. Like, it depends on the essay. Not all essays are about accomplishments. Some essays are about failures. Some essays are about managing people. Some essays are about why this school. What are your goals? Those don't go on your resume.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're if your essay is a elongated version of your resume, you're doing a bad job, and vice versa. I mean, like, you want to zoom in and zoom out on both of them, but they have different purposes.
Yeah. Okay. How important is undergrad GPA in the application? Very important if you're from a US school. Not so important if you're from an international school that a lot of people, not a lot of people know. What do you think, Sam?
I mean, I think it also depends on what's your GMAT score, what's your kind of work experience. But generally, I think it's important, and you want to have the highest possible. But I think the GPA is something that can probably be covered up or explained the easiest way, other than the other two.
Right. Okay, I'm gonna have to put a user in timeout again. So let me just go and do that. Okay, so question about looking forward to future resume sessions. Is there a need to put an introduction paragraph at the top of the resume? No, a lot of resumes have objective. Your objective is very much implied. Your objective is to get in the business school, right? That's it. So no objective, no clarification. Just jump right in with your work experience. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the personal statement's for. That's what the essays are for. So I don't waste space on that.
Awesome. Last question. Working full-time, but developed my own firm in a sector I specialize in, turned into a profitable business, helped my family's finances. Should one put this under work experience? I would say, yeah. I mean, absolutely. You worked full-time, so I would put in there. Sam's put his experience on baking cookies.
Yes, I would do this. Yeah, I would do this. I think this is really solid and shows a lot of stuff. So I would totally put it in there.
Awesome. Great. So this was sort of it. We thought it would be helpful to talk about high-level stuff of the resume and then also take some specific questions. We'll do another resume episode next Saturday where we would take questions like these, but I would bring in more bullet points from the community. So I have a thread going. If you want me to or Sam to review your resume, send me a PM on GMAT Club. My username is my first name, Souvik101990. Also, if you enjoyed the session, drop us a like. That helps us get to more people. Subscribe to the channel. That helps you know when we are doing another video. We're doing another YouTube live stream tomorrow, same time, basically 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, and like some 9:30 p.m. in India time. So join us for that. And again, thank you so much for coming. And MIM resume, we're getting some requests. Yeah, throw me some bullet points on my PM on GMAT Club, and I'd be happy to review them next week. But meanwhile, join us tomorrow. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and thank you guys so much for joining. Sam, thanks for coming in. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.